This is the story about how a brave young maiden took a stand against all odds to save her beloved country, no matter what obstacles were thrown in her way in the Hundred Years' War. The dominant French defied her before bowing at her feet. The inquisitive English probed her with no evidence of her heresy at first, and the warring knights bent before her will. Joan of Arc took a stand for the common people of France against the dominant educated classes of both the English and the French, and in doing so, rebelled against medieval social conventions for her class and gender.
Given that, she did help her country, she was certainly a heroic figure, who died for what she believed in.
However, the quest to save her country did not start at the first battle. Instead, in 1425, it started with a poor peasant girl claiming to hear voices nobody believed in. Joan of Arc was born in 1412 in Domremy le Pucelle to a faithful Catholic father. At the time, even the bourgeois considered the peasants of her village incredibly inferior to them, not to mention the female peasants. Joan was one of them. Even without many freedoms, she enjoyed her peaceful life of dancing, sewing, and cooking. However, she was illiterate and experienced the many cruelties toward women at that time. Visions from the heavens compelled her to leave her home at 11 and face the cruel world to fulfill her destiny and satisfy her Lord. Joan believed God had assigned her two tasks: 1. To crown Charles VII, and 2. To drive the English out of France in order to save her nation from plummeting into their hands. Guided by Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch, Joan began her journey to save her kingdom.
One of the most significant battles this heroine took a stand in was the legendary Battle of Orleans, because it was her greatest victory and the first victory the French had experienced for a long time. 5,000 English troops stormed Orleans to capture this important city territory. However, the French arrived with around 10,000 men to take a stand for their country. At their head was none other than Joan of Arc. During the battle, Joan of Arc rallied the men, lifted the spirits of all the French warriors and knights, and showed tremendous leadership when driving the English out of Orleans. With Joan, the French were able to capture the outlying fortresses of Saint-Lô and Saint-Jean-le-Blanc, further assisting the French in the overarching war. Joan of Arc successfully led another invasion into the formerly French city of Reims and reconquered it from the English to crown the proper King of France, to solidify his rule and extinguish any claim the English had on the throne. The same June of 1429, Charles VII was crowned, and one of Joan's two assignments was completed.
After the King of France's coronation, his first move was to negotiate with his archenemy, the Duke of Burgundy. While stalling on any battles for a few weeks, his mind was on attacking Paris and finishing the war once and for all. Joan of Arc was previously against attacking Paris and Normandy until Charles VII's coronation. However, Charles was the King of France now. Joan was elated after a series of victories. Her fall unconsciously started in the Battle of Paris. Many of the French citizens and historians believe the attack on Paris was a devastating mistake. This was the first major defeat Joan of Arc had ever faced. Nevertheless, the battle increased Joan of Arc's reputation because of her unprecedented recovery from a fatal injury. As she led her men to scale the walls of the fortress, Joan of Arc stood for a second in front of a wide expanse of enemy troops, completely vulnerable. She took a stand at the fortress for her people, her troops, her king, and her country. However, she was inevitably shot with an arrow, right through a crack in her armor, right into her heart. She was instantly taken to a healer to recover. Men waited endlessly in fear for the death of their leader. Nobody expected her to survive. However, Joan of Arc escaped the claws of death and regained her strength, as bright and courageous as before, to continue taking a stand for her beloved France. She was not crippled in any manner, psychologically or physiologically. This phenomenal feat proved that she was truly sent by God to be the savior of France, and that this was not her time to die.
When the Burgundians decided to lay siege on Compiègne, Joan of Arc made the difficult and tragic decision to take a stand for the city, despite her knowing that she would get captured if she ventured there. She brought small numbers of troops into the city the morning of May 23rd with their head held high. She was going to fight for France, as all people face risks in war, and this was no exception. Later that night, she, in an attack against the Burgundian camp north of the besieged city, Burgundian troops were hidden behind the well-known Mont de Clarioux hill and suddenly emerged. forcing Joan's troops to retreat. Joan was surrounded, encompassed, and encircled by Burgundians. There was no way out of it. She refused to surrender as a Burgundian soldier rode up behind her and yanked her off her horse. The undefeatable, unconquerable visionary was captured. She now had to face the deciding moment of her life, a trial biased completely against her. The sole purpose of the trial was to convict her and to extinguish the moral power of France. They would stop at nothing to win the war they had fought through for a century. Joan could not win her final battle. The most impressive stand Joan of Arc took was her defiance in the face of the canons and judges at her infamous trial in Rouen, France, that resulted in her crucifixion. She was not guarded by female guards like she was supposed to be, but male guards. She was mentally tortured, even though it was considered illegal at the time. Her interrogation consisted of impossible to answer questions in no particular order slung at a rapid fire for long periods of time. An acclaimed theologist could not answer most of the questions she was forced to answer. Nevertheless, she provided many brilliant, spontaneous answers to them. Perhaps her most famous response is a reply to a query about her being in God's grace. After being convicted, she relented and signed a declaration that she would not participate in heretic acts, act like a person she was not, nor believe her voices existed. Under the fear of sexual assault, Joan donned men's clothing again and demanded that she must listen to the voices for her country and her God. By breaking the oath, the English gladly burned her at the stake for standing up for her beliefs.
Today, Joan of Arc is the symbol of various organizations and communities around the world.
One thing that really interests me is that a lot of countries claim they have their own Joan of Arc. Every country, it seems, has a strong female figure, often important in a battle, whom they will kind of identify with Joan of Arc. So even in non-Western countries, this is a figure that people kind of rally around and identify with in a very interesting way.
It is a great honor to be known as a Joan of Arc. From the heroines in Iran to South Korea, Joan of Arc has given hope to young girls everywhere to stand up for what they believe in. During the rise of nationalism, Joan of Arc represented the national pride of France.
There are lots of, back and forth in terms of the role of the church and the role of the state in society, and both of them are claiming Joan of Arc. And so she's looked upon as the national heroine, but she also becomes canonized in the early 20th century, and she becomes the patron saint of France. So I think, she's popular among the Catholics, but she's also popular among the French. The communists loved her because she was from the people. The feminists loved her because she was a woman involved in politics.
Furthermore, she is used by the gay and transgender community as a symbol because she proudly wore clothing of the opposite gender to accomplish her goals. She is used by the extreme right political party of modern France as a historical reason why they should follow in Joan's footsteps of driving out the invading foreigners to expel foreign immigrants. She is used by the extreme left party of modern France because she was a strong-willed woman that refused to let men rule her world. In Great Britain, the Women's Social and Political Union used her as a symbol in the late 1800s and early 1900s. As a matter of fact, one of their leading activists named her daughter Joan after Joan of Arc. Even Nazi Germany somehow connected their cause to vanquish other inferior religions to Joan of Arc's devotion to her country and religion. She is the patron saint of not only France, but the world, by people on opposing sides for reasons spanning light years apart, centuries after her legendary quest to turn the war around and ultimately change the course of the world. There may have been many decades between our times. However, Joan of Arc's trial, and thus her life, is one of the best documented from that era for her popularity and infamy. Her story is still remembered today and inspires people everywhere to take a stand, whether they believe in her heavenly voices or not. Joan of Arc's selfless stand for her gender, her social class, her beliefs, and her country will always be a reason why we must continue to stand for worthy causes we believe in and never back down, even in the face of death.